Hey guys, welcome back. Or, if it's your first time here, I'm so glad you found your way to this quiet corner of the night. Tonight, you're about to hear a soft, gentle retelling of one of the most timeless tales in Greek mythology, the story of Perseus and Medusa. It's not just about slaying monsters or heroic battles, it's about fate, forgiveness, quiet courage, and the ember of kindness that glows even after the fire has dimmed. This version is woven like a bedtime spell, slow, soothing, and made to guide you gently into rest. Before we begin, if this story brings you any peace or comfort, I'd be so grateful if you could take just a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps this little sanctuary reach others who might need it too. So, wherever you are, curled up in bed, listening in the dark, or drifting beneath the stars, I hope this tale settles softly in your heart and leads you to a truly peaceful night's sleep. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin the journey of Perseus and Medusa, not as you've always heard it, but as it might be whispered in a dream. Long ago, when the stars still whispered secrets into the ears of sleeping shepherds, and the wind carried the songs of nymphs across the silver oceans, there was a kingdom nestled on the edge of the wide, blue world. This was the land of Argos, a place where mountains leaned like ancient elders toward the sea, and olive trees bent in the breeze as though bowing to time itself. In this land, in a high tower built of ivory and stone, lived a young woman named Danae. Her hair was the color of sunlit barley, and her eyes carried the hush of twilight seas. She had been locked away in the tower by her father, King Acrisius, a man of proud fears and trembling pride. A prophecy, spoken in hushed tones by an oracle whose eyes glowed with the light of truths unseen, had once reached his ears. Your grandson shall be your undoing. Afraid, yet unwilling to harm his own daughter, Acrisius built her a home in isolation, a room of light and silence, with no doors but one guarded gate, no windows but those that opened only to the sky. He thought fate might forget her if she were kept apart from the world, but fate has never been easily outwitted. One evening, when the sky blushed in shades of peach and plum, Danae lay beneath a curtain of stars, whispering her wishes to the breeze. The moon watched quietly as a wind rose, warm and golden, and the stars blinked slowly, as if holding their breath. Then, like a dream shaped by gentle hands, came the rain. But it was no ordinary rain. It shimmered like sunlight caught in crystal, falling not from clouds, but from the very heavens themselves. A golden rain, soft as silk and bright as the laughter of gods. It drifted through the open window, and within that shining mist, the form of a man emerged, powerful, radiant, and kind. Zeus, the king of the gods, had come not with thunder or tempest, but with gentleness. He spoke no loud words, nor did he command. Instead, he sang a song older than the oceans, a lullaby spun of stars and longing. And in that song, Danae saw not a god, but a dream she had always carried, of love, of freedom, of the world beyond her walls. From that night, the silence in the tower was never quite the same. It pulsed with secret life, and in time, Danae's belly grew round with the promise of a child. The nurses whispered, the guards muttered, and soon King Acrisius learned what the gods had not troubled to hide. Fury thundered in his chest, but still he dared not spill divine blood. So he ordered a chest to be built, strong, sealed, and made for sea. Into it, he placed his daughter and her newborn son. He gave no final word, no blessing, only a nod that might have been sorrow or might have been fear. At dawn, As the seagulls circled in silence, the chest was cast into the embrace of the waves. The sea, ancient and wide-hearted, carried them gently. The winds were slow, the skies clear, and the gods, perhaps moved by love or bound by their own mysteries, watched in silence as the wooden cradle drifted across the azure plains. The baby, named Perseus, slept with his tiny fist curled beside his mother's heartbeat. Danae sang old lullabies as the stars faded, and the chest floated through days like petals upon a stream. At last, they came to the Isle of Seriphos, a quiet place where fishermen rose before the sun, and laughter echoed softly along the rocky coves. A kind man named Dictys, a netcaster with sea salt in his beard and gentleness in his hands, found the chest upon the shore. He did not ask where they came from. He simply opened his arms and his home. And in time, little Perseus grew beneath his roof, strong as a wave and bright as morning. The islanders grew fond of the boy who raced the wind and spoke kindly to animals. They said he had eyes like polished agate and a voice like a young hawk, clear, bold, and unafraid. Danae, though still carrying the hush of her tower days, laughed more often now, and her songs were no longer only for the stars. But even in the gentlest of places, shadows sometimes wander in. Polydectes, king of the island and brother to Dictys, was a man with ambitions larger than his heart. He saw Danae not as a guest, but as a prize. He courted her with fine robes and jeweled words, but her heart was quiet, closed like a flower in moonlight. And when he saw that her son, strong, brave, and protective, stood between him and his desires, the king began to scheme. Still, the sea remained calm, and the winds gentle. Perseus grew like a cedar tree, tall and rooted, unknowing of the storm his name would one day summon. In those golden days of youth, he often wandered the cliffs, where gulls wheeled and waves thundered in distant rhythm. He did not know of Medusa yet, nor of quests, or monsters, or the weight of fates that curled like vines through the blood of gods and men. But sometimes, in his dreams, he would see a reflection not his own, a face with eyes that turned men to stone, with hair like a nest of serpents, and hear the low song of something ancient, calling through time. He would wake in silence, heart still, and the stars would blink above the sea, as if waiting. The days on Seriphos passed like soft clouds across a spring sky, gentle, golden, and forgetful of storms. Perseus, now approaching manhood, was no longer the small boy who clung to Danae's robe. His limbs had lengthened with purpose, his voice deepened like the low roll of distant thunder, and his gaze had taken on a steadiness, not cold, but aware, as though he had learned to listen not just with his ears, but with the soul he carried quietly inside. He spent much of his time among the fishermen, learning the language of tides and the weight of nets heavy with the sea's gifts. Dictys, who had once lifted him from a waterlogged chest, now taught him to sail, to knot rope blindfolded, to read the moods of wind as one reads the shifting face of a friend. Perseus loved the sea, its honesty, its power, its rhythm. There was no deceit in a wave, no whispering politics in a tide. Only the eternal truth of movement. But while Perseus cast his nets and laughed with village children, something else was beginning to stir. Polydectes, the island's king, watched from his shaded halls. He saw the strength of the youth. He saw the protectiveness in his arm when Danae walked near, the way her smile bloomed only when her son was close. And though he wore a crown, he felt powerless. He had tried persuasion, gifts of coral necklaces and silk from far-off markets. He had offered Danae fine food, gentle songs, even a garden where the lilies bloomed white and sweet. But she remained unmoved. The rejection bruised not just his pride, but his sense of dominion. How could a king, the ruler of all Seriphos, not command the heart of one woman? His resentment, like ivy, curled and tightened. So he turned his eyes toward her son. One evening, as twilight draped the island in velvet, Polydectes summoned the court to a feast. The villagers arrived with flowers in their hair and laughter in their step, unaware of the undercurrent beneath the celebration. The king stood tall beside the long table, his robes woven with deep gold thread, and spoke of joy, harvest, and the gratitude he felt for his people. Then, with a smile thin as reed grass, he declared his intent to wed. Gasps swept through the gathering. All eyes turned toward Danae, who stood like a statue carved of pearl, her expression unreadable. But Polydectes did not speak her name. Instead, he raised a goblet and declared that he would take Hippodamia, princess of Thessaly, as his bride, a woman he had never met, but whose name gave him political reach and ceremonial grandeur. It was all theater, of course, a fiction to provoke and ensnare. As the crowd buzzed with curiosity and wine dulled the room's sense of reason, Polydectes made his next move. He turned to the guests and announced with mock humility that in honor of such a grand union, each man should offer a gift for the bride: a horse, a jewel, a relic of meaning. When Perseus, seated beside Dictys, heard this, his heart sank. He owned nothing of worth. No sword, no jewel, not even a horse to call his own. He stood, young but proud, and declared, "I have no treasures to offer your majesty, but name what you desire, and I shall bring it, no matter the task." The room quieted. Polydectes' smile deepened, but it did not warm. "Anything?" he asked, with a voice smooth as drifting sand. Perseus nodded. "Anything." Then came the moment, quiet, cruel, and shaped like destiny. "Bring me," said the king, "the head of Medusa." A hush like falling snow swallowed the hall. Even the musicians paused. Everyone knew of Medusa, the Gorgon, whose gaze turned men to stone, whose hair slithered with living serpents, whose face was hidden in nightmare. Her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were immortal, but Medusa alone was mortal and lethal. Perseus stood still. The name settled on his shoulders like an invisible weight. But something inside him, something untested and bright, refused to bend. "If that is your wish," he said, voice steady, "then I shall return with her head." Around him, murmurs rose like mist. Dictys reached out, his hand gripping Perseus's arm, but the young man had already stepped into the current of fate. He did not know where the Gorgons dwelled, nor what he would need. But he knew one thing: he would not be tricked nor shamed into silence. Later that night, as the stars bloomed in the ink-black sky, Danae came to her son. She said nothing at first, only looked at him, long and slow, as if memorizing the shape of his face. Then she placed a hand over his heart. "Whatever you face," she whispered, "carry no hate. Let your strength be born of love, not fury." Perseus didn't answer. He only nodded. He was not a hero yet, not in the songs, nor in the hearts of strangers. But the sea had taught him to listen. And the stars above Seriphos, blinking softly in their ancient patience, seemed to be waiting, just as they once had when his cradle rode the waves. In the silence that followed, a breeze curled through the open window. It carried the scent of salt and something older, a whisper not of fear, but of beginning. At the edge of dawn, as silver light skimmed the tops of olive trees and the sea lay still as glass, Perseus stood at the shoreline of Seriphos. The world behind him still slept, save for the gentle hush of waves brushing stone and the occasional cry of a seabird echoing across the cliffs. His heart beat quietly but firmly, as if echoing the rhythm of something greater. The task set before him was monumental, the slaying of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, whose very gaze could turn flesh to cold, lifeless stone. He had no map, no companions, no weapons beyond a fisherman's knife and the calloused wisdom of the sea. And yet, he felt watched, not with menace, but with presence, as though the very air had noticed him. He turned to leave, his mind heavy with uncertainty, when a soft rustling broke the silence behind him. There, where the sand met grass, stood a woman cloaked in blue-gray mist. Her features shimmered like moonlight on still water, shifting subtly with every blink. She did not speak at once, only tilted her head slightly, as if studying the line of his shoulders, the stillness of his hands. "Perseus," she said at last, her voice like the wind that slips through cypress branches. "You walk toward a path few dare tread." He bowed slightly, unsure whether to kneel or flee. "Who are you?" "I have watched your life from the first breath drawn in that chest upon the sea. I am Athena, daughter of wisdom, shield of heroes, and bearer of clear sight." Perseus's breath caught. He had heard her name in lullabies. The goddess of wisdom and war, who guided kings and judged mortals not by their might, but by their mind. "I come not with command," she said, walking slowly across the sand toward him, "but with aid. For if you are to face Medusa, you must not go alone, not in body, nor in thought." She lifted her hand, and from the air formed a shield, round and radiant. Its surface gleamed like polished silver, but it reflected not the sky, only what stood behind it. "This is your mirror," Athena whispered. "You must never look at her directly. Use this, and you may face her without turning to stone." As Perseus reached out, another figure stepped from behind a copse of tamarisk trees. This one moved with the grace of wind over water. His cloak fluttered though there was no breeze, and on his feet were sandals with tiny wings that beat gently in the still air. "Hermes," said Athena softly, "brother of roads and riddles." The young man grinned, his eyes alight with a mischievous kindness. "They say mortals can't fly," he said, "but gods are fond of breaking rules." He held out a pair of golden sandals. "These will carry you farther than your legs ever could. With them, you'll find speed and escape." Perseus stared at the divine siblings, overwhelmed not by fear, but awe. "Why me?" he asked, his voice low. "Why would gods help a fisherman's son?" Athena stepped close and gently placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Because bravery is not born from blood," she said, "and the thread of fate often winds through the humblest of hands." Hermes added with a wink, "Also, the stars rather like you. And the stars are never wrong." Together, they walked toward the edge of the sea, where a stone path shimmered briefly over the waves, not solid, not real, yet enough for one who believed. Athena gestured to the horizon. "To defeat Medusa, you must first find the Gray Sisters, daughters of the sea and night, who share one tooth, one eye, and 1,000 secrets. They know where the Gorgons dwell." She handed him a small satchel made of dream silk. "Inside is a cloak woven with shadows. It will hide you when you must vanish." Perseus took it gently, his fingers brushing divine cloth. "Trust your instincts," Hermes said, adjusting the winged sandals at Perseus's feet. And remember, even monsters were once children of the gods. With that, the gods stepped back, their forms growing translucent in the rising sun. Perseus stood alone again, but not the same. He wore the sandals of flight. He bore a shield that gleamed with mirrored warning, and in his heart, a quiet courage had begun to take root, not born of power, but of purpose. He did not run. He did not shout his name to the winds. He simply turned, and with the grace of a new dawn, rose into the sky. A figure carried by golden wings, his cloak fluttering behind like the memory of a prayer. The sea stretched below, wide and gleaming. The mountains ahead shimmered like sleeping giants. And far beyond, where the world grew wild and dark, the song of the Gorgons began to stir. The sky grew darker the farther Perseus traveled, not with storm, but with age, a kind of shadow that did not fall from clouds, but from memory itself. The stars above him dimmed, as if peering down through layers of forgotten time. Even the winds that had once carried him with joyful push now glided silently beside him, cautious and still. He had flown beyond the lands of men, beyond fields and markets and song. What lay ahead was a wilderness not marked on any map, a place where gods rarely walked and mortals only ever stumbled. It was there, in the border between waking and dream, that the Gray Sisters were said to dwell. Perseus descended from the sky as dawn stretched pale fingers across the horizon. The land below was a stretch of craggy stone and ash-gray moss. No birds called, no leaves rustled. The silence was so deep that it seemed to hum. Ahead, nestled between jagged rocks, stood a cave. Its mouth yawned like an ancient wound, rimmed with stone, worn smooth by wind and weeping time. Perseus stepped forward, pulling the shadow cloak Athena had given him tightly around his shoulders. The material didn't warm him, but it seemed to muffle the sound of his footsteps, softening his presence like mist rolling low through a hollow. He entered the cave. Inside, the world narrowed. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of dust and secrets. As he moved deeper, he heard voices, low, rasping murmurs, weaving through each other like tangled vines. Who's breathing in the dark? Is it the sea again? No, too warm, too young, too alive. He stepped closer. There, seated in a circle of stone, were three women, ancient, skeletal, wrapped in folds of gray wool and shadow. Their skin was dry as bark, their hair like cobwebs soaked in ink. But it was their faces that struck him still, hollow, eyeless, yet somehow watching. In the center of them, passed hand to hand with eerie rhythm, was a single eye, round, glistening, and too alive for the room it occupied. With each pass, the eye blinked and flickered, tasting the air, seeing in ways that no mortal eye could. These were the Gray Sisters, born of sea and night, older than moonlight and rumor. We smell a question, one said. We taste a name, said another. And hear the beating of a hero's heart, rasped the third. Perseus stepped forward, heart steady. I seek the way to the Gorgons. The sisters chuckled, and the sound was dry, like sand falling through brittle fingers. Why would a boy chase death? Why would a breath seek silence? Why would eyes beg to be closed forever? He did not flinch. Because a king has asked for her head. Kings ask for many heads, they hissed together, and few returned to ask again. The eye was passed again, left to right, hand to trembling hand. Perseus watched its path. The moment it landed in the palm of the rightmost sister, he moved. Swift as the tide, sure as a promise, he darted forward, and snatched the eye from her fingers. The cave erupted in shrieks. "Thief! Murderer of sight! Give it back or be cursed!" But Perseus held the eye high, careful not to crush it. "Not until you tell me where she is." The sisters clawed at the air, blind and furious. "We cannot see you. We cannot see the stars. Everything is gone." He waited. At last, they quieted, still panting, but beaten not by strength, but truth. "She sleeps in the land beyond night," one finally whispered. "Across the desert of forgotten bones," murmured the next. "On an island ringed in stone, where no birds fly and no light dares linger," breathed the last. "She is guarded by her sisters, the deathless ones," they chanted. "But she alone can be slain." Perseus nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. And with care, he placed the eye on a flat rock near their groping hands. One of them felt it, grasped it, and sighed, not with joy, but with a return to the curse they knew. He turned to go. "Beware!" one of them rasped behind him. "She was not always a monster." Another added, "Once she was beautiful, loved by gods, cursed by them too." And the third whispered, "Even stone remembers sorrow." Perseus said nothing. The shadow cloak curled around him once more, and with winged sandals whispering against the air, he rose once more toward the sky. The path had been revealed. Far to the west, beyond mortal roads and memory, awaited Medusa, a creature feared by kings, whispered by gods, and haunted by a past few dared recall. But Perseus, now armed with more than tools, with knowledge, warning, and a heart still tethered to love, did not tremble. Above him, the sky darkened once more. Ahead, the world held its breath. The wind changed as Perseus flew westward, not in strength, but in song. No longer did it hum with the warmth of home or the laughter of gulls wheeling over Seriphos. This wind was old. It whispered names that had not been spoken for centuries, and sighed across waters where no sail had been raised in generations. It spoke not to the ears, but to the bones. Below him, the ocean stretched endless and black, rippling with a quiet pulse, like the slow heartbeat of the world. There were no ships, no birds, only the silver line of his own shadow trailing across the waves, flickering and vanishing with the tilt of the sun. Days passed, or what might have been days. The sky here no longer changed as it once did. The sun drifted slowly behind thick veils of cloud, and time felt suspended, like breath held too long. Then far on the horizon, Perseus saw it. A shape, dark, jagged, rising from the sea like the spine of a forgotten god. The island. It had no name, for none had returned to speak it. It was not marked by color or sound, only by the stillness that surrounded it. Even the waves, which had always sung and slapped playfully against his sandals, now grew hushed, reluctant to touch its shores. Perseus descended slowly. The air here was dense, as though the island exhaled something unspoken. Rock formations jutted from the ground like broken teeth. Bones, bleached and brittle, lay scattered, not fresh but old, cracked and forgotten. There were no trees, no flowers, only stone, and silence. His winged sandals touched the earth, and for a long moment nothing moved. Then came a rustle, faint, dry, the sound of scales sliding across stone. Perseus froze. He drew the polished shield of Athena from his back and angled it carefully. It reflected not the path before him, but what lay behind. And in that curved mirror, he saw shapes begin to stir. Statues, dozens of them, men, warriors, some with arms raised, mouths open in frozen shouts, others mid-turn, as if fleeing something too swift to escape. Their forms were perfect, too perfect. Marble skin, eyes wide in horror, faces contorted in silent pleas. They were not carved, they had been. Perseus swallowed, careful not to speak aloud. Even his breath felt too loud in this place. He stepped between the statues like a shadow, keeping the shield before him, walking backward into the deeper gloom. The further he went, the heavier the air grew. His heart beat slow and deliberate, sinking with the hush around him. He could not see her yet, not directly, but her presence folded around the island like a veil. A weight, a memory, Medusa. Her name beat in his blood like a low drum. He moved deeper into the labyrinthine terrain, a valley of stone towers, each one rising like the hushed scream of a man turned to monument. Time seemed to slow, stretch, and then forget itself. Perseus counted his steps, not in numbers, but in thoughts. He thought of Danae, of Dictys, of Athena's hand on his shoulder, of the three sisters, eyeless and grieving. And then, at the very edge of hearing, he sensed it. Breath, not wind, not echo. Breath. A slow, pained rhythm, as though something ancient had never truly slept, only waited. He crouched low, letting the edge of his shield reflect what his eyes could not dare. In its curved surface, he saw a cave mouth yawning wide, and within it, movement. Not fast, not wild, but sad. There, lying coiled in the dim, her body half shrouded in shadow, was a woman, or what had once been one. Her form was powerful, but not monstrous, sculpted like a statue worn by wind and sorrow. Her arms were strong, her back broad, her legs folded beneath her like a resting beast. But her head was a living halo of serpents. They slithered and whispered, their tongues flicking into the stale air, as if searching always for something that might not come. And her face, even through the shield's reflection, it pulled at his soul. It was not hideous. No fangs, no grotesque snarl. Only stillness. A terrible stillness, the kind one sees in the eyes of those who have lost everything and now exist not to rage, but to endure. She sat surrounded by stone figures, more recent, more fragile. Some had dropped their swords. One had covered his face, too late. Medusa stirred. She did not speak. She did not roar or hiss or strike. She only raised her head slowly, as though some piece of her still hoped that this time someone might come to see her, not fear her. Perseus's breath caught. She was not what he had imagined, not a beast, not a villain, but a tragedy. Yet his task remained. He crouched lower, grasped the adamantine sickle Hermes had whispered into his hand before parting. A blade forged by the gods to cut what fate had bound. The shield angled in his grip, his heart now heavy with something more than fear. Pity. He was no longer a boy, not even a hero. Not yet. But in that moment, he was something else. A witness. A bearer of mercy twisted into duty. He moved closer. Each step timed with the serpent's sway, each breath measured against the stillness. The blade gleamed once in the reflected light, like a falling star. And still, she did not rise. She only turned slightly, her eyes heavy with dreams that had long since died. Perseus crouched at the threshold of fate. The cave was still. The wind did not enter here, nor did time. Even the sea beyond the cliffs had gone silent, as if refusing to intrude upon what was about to pass. He held Athena's mirrored shield before him, its surface catching flickers of movement, the slow curling of serpents atop Medusa's head, the slight rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed. Her body remained half in shadow, half in light, and even through reflection, Perseus sensed the weight she carried. not just her curse, but the sorrow beneath it. He tightened his grip on the adamantine sickle, its blade cold in his hand. Forged in divine fire, it was sharp enough to sever stone, shadow, even the bindings of destiny. Or so the gods had whispered. But here, in this hollow world of stone and silence, even the finest blade felt small. Perseus closed his eyes for a moment, not in fear, but in respect. Then he moved. Step by step, shield held before him like a window into another world, he advanced deeper into the cave. The serpents stirred more now, hissing, not in fury, but in awareness. Their tongues flicked in his direction. They felt the nearness of something living, something not yet turned. Medusa lifted her head slowly. In the mirrored shield, Perseus saw her face more clearly now. It was not monstrous. It was not evil. It was tired. Her skin, pale as moonstone, was traced with delicate lines, not of age, but of grief. Her lips, once perhaps red with laughter, were now pressed in a quiet line, and her eyes, closed, heavy-lidded, gave the impression of someone who had not slept in centuries. But the shield did not lie. This was she, the last of the Gorgons, the cursed daughter of gods, the one whose gaze had ended 100 lives. His heart ached. He wondered, not for the first time, what she might have been if the world had chosen differently, if Poseidon had not violated her in Athena's temple, if Athena had not, in wrath or judgment, turned her beauty into a curse, if men had not come, again and again, hoping to claim her head for glory. She had not asked to become a monster. She had only survived. And now she waited, not with rage, not with hope, but with the silence of someone who knows the end has come. The serpents hissed louder, sensing movement behind them. Perseus inhaled deeply. He raised the blade, and with a single, fluid arc, swift as light, clean as morning wind, he struck. There was no scream, no flash of divine fury, no thrashing limbs or curse spoken into the cave's bones. Only silence. Then, a sound like cloth falling, soft and final. Perseus dared not look. He kept his gaze locked on the shield's reflection, even as he lowered the blade and stepped forward. There, upon the stone floor, lay her body, still, curled like a sleeping child, head gently separated from shoulders. Her face remained untouched by time, peaceful, almost released. And beside her, still writhing gently, the serpents coiled in slow grief, as if unaware that the heart they guarded had ceased its beat. He took the satin pouch of shadows, gifted to him by Athena, and carefully placed the head within. Even severed, it retained its power, for the curse lived not in blood, but in magic. As the drawstrings pulled closed, the serpents curled inward and vanished with a final sigh. Perseus rose, and for a long moment he stood in the cave, listening. It was not sorrow that filled the space, nor victory, only a strange quiet, as if the cave itself had exhaled. And perhaps, somewhere in the distant heavens, a god or goddess, or both, watched without speaking. He turned and began his way out. The statues seemed less fearsome now, not just reminders of death, but of choices made, of men who had sought conquest, not understanding, of eyes that had looked directly, not out of bravery, but hunger. Perseus passed them with care. He did not boast. He did not whisper songs of triumph. He only walked, one step after another, the pouch pressed to his chest like a weight not measured in stone, but in memory. Outside, the sky was pale, not quite day, not yet night. The sea stirred, welcoming him back. He fastened the pouch securely to his side, tightened his grip on the shield, and with a small leap, lifted once more into the sky. The sandals of Hermes carrying him, not with the speed of victory, but with the grace of reverence. The island shrank behind him, and though he did not look back, the wind carried one final whisper to his ear. It did not come from Medusa, but from the stones themselves. A breath, a word, perhaps. Thank you. Perseus soared above the sea once more, but the sky no longer felt as wide. The wind brushed against his face, cool and constant, yet no longer playful. The sandals of Hermes carried him swiftly, their golden wings beating in quiet rhythm. Below, the ocean gleamed in silvers and blues, the crests of waves catching faint light from a sun hidden behind pale clouds. But the beauty did not reach his eyes. In the shadow pouch at his side, Medusa's head rested, unseen but not unfelt. Its power pulsed like a second heartbeat. Even sealed in shadow silk, it seemed to exude a strange gravity, as if the very world bent slightly around its presence. Perseus said nothing. He had no words. He had not only slain a monster, he had witnessed the sorrow of a soul long forgotten, the remnants of a woman condemned by gods and hunted by men. His chest carried not pride, but weight. The kind of heaviness that cannot be shared, only carried, like a name no longer spoken, or a lullaby hummed by someone who no longer remembers why. The clouds began to thicken as he flew eastward toward the lands of men once more. But fate, stirred by the blood of gods and the steps of heroes, was not yet done shaping his path. Far below, a black shape broke the horizon, a rocky outcrop that rose sharply from the ocean like the fin of a sleeping beast. Waves lashed against it, foaming white. It was no island, no harbor, merely a jagged place where the sea refused to rest. And there, bound by chains of bronze and sorrow, was a figure. Perseus descended before he knew why. His heart urged his hands to guide the sandals downward, toward the cries that had not yet reached his ears, but had already reached something deeper. Instinct, perhaps, or destiny. He landed softly on a ledge of stone. The air smelled of salt and sky, and a storm brewed on the horizon. Before him was a woman. She was chained to the rock by her wrists, her arms stretched overhead. Her white gown, torn by wind and water, clung to her frame. Her skin was the color of dawn, and her hair, dark and wild, whipped in the sea breeze like a banner of defiance. Her head drooped forward, but her breathing was steady. She was not unconscious, only waiting. Perseus stepped closer. The clink of his sandals touching stone stirred her, and she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met his. And for the first time in days, Perseus forgot to carry sorrow. Those eyes, wide and luminous, the color of sea glass caught in sunlight, did not plead, did not accuse. They were calm, resolute, and clear. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly, stepping nearer. Her voice came gently, like reeds brushing against a river's edge. "My name is Andromeda," she said, "daughter of Queen Cassiopeia and King Cepheus of Ethiopia." She glanced toward the sea behind her. "They chained me here as sacrifice, to appease a sea monster sent by Poseidon." Perseus's brows furrowed. "Why?" "My mother," she said with a flicker of shame, "boasted that I was more beautiful than the Nereids, sea nymphs beloved by the gods. Poseidon, angered, cursed our lands with floods and famine. When we begged the oracle for help, it said only my life would restore the sea's mercy." Perseus looked to the ocean. It boiled, dark and angry, and in the distance, something stirred. A ridge of spine, a flash of scale, a tremor beneath the water. The monster was near. Andromeda closed her eyes. "Go," she whispered. "You've already risked much. Do not lose your life for one already given." But Perseus did not move. He glanced toward the satchel at his side, the one sealed tight with shadow thread. He remembered Medusa's final breath, the quiet in her cave, the statues frozen in mid-motion. He reached for the pouch. Andromeda's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Trust me," Perseus said gently. "I've seen worse than monsters, and I've carried sorrow heavier than the sea." The water below began to surge. The beast emerged, long, serpent-like, with jaws wide enough to swallow boats whole. Its eyes burned gold, its breath steaming the very air. Andromeda turned her face, preparing for the end. But Perseus did not draw a sword. He did not shout. He simply reached into the satchel and, with shield angled in his other hand, drew forth the head of Medusa. Even severed, her face remained haunting. The sea monster lunged, and in the instant its eyes met hers, even through divine hatred and primal hunger, it froze. Not in surprise, not in fear, but in stone. A roar turned to silence, a shadow to sculpture, and before them, where the ocean had once writhed with death, now rose a statue, frozen in fury. Its open jaws turned forever toward the sky. The waves calmed. The wind stilled. Perseus tucked the head away, quickly sealing it again in the pouch. He turned to Andromeda, who stared in disbelief. What was that?" she whispered. "A gift," he replied softly. "From someone the world misunderstood." He moved to her chains, cutting through them with the sickle Hermes had given him. As the last shackle fell, she collapsed into his arms, too weak to stand, yet burning with silent gratitude. Above them, the storm clouds began to pull apart. A single shaft of light broke through, golden, warm, and true. The sea, once wild with fury, now lay gentle and still, like a beast soothed by lullabies it had long forgotten. The statue of the slain monster stood silent and cold, jutting from the waves like an ancient sentinel, a testament to a curse turned weapon, and a weapon turned mercy. Perseus helped Andromeda to her feet. Though her body trembled, there was steel in her spirit. She held herself upright, refusing to lean too heavily upon him. The wind caught strands of her hair and tangled them across her cheeks, but she did not push them away. She stared out at the sea, unmoving. "Is it truly over?" she asked, voice soft and distant. "For now," Perseus said. "The gods are never quiet for long." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips, the first he had seen. He removed his cloak, the one woven from shadows, and draped it over her shoulders. She accepted it without a word, her fingers curling into the folds of it, like someone trying to hold on to warmth they hadn't felt in years. "We should leave this place," he said, glancing up at the sky. "Your parents must be searching, or mourning." Andromeda hesitated. "They made peace with my death days ago." "Then let them be surprised." He guided her onto a rocky ledge that overlooked the sea. From there, they could leap, and the winged sandals of Hermes would carry them both. Perseus had never flown with another before, but something in him trusted the wind now. It had followed him into darkness. It would carry him out. "Are you ready?" he asked. Andromeda nodded, her hand finding his, not tightly, but with intention, not fear, but faith. He leapt. The sandals beat like heartbeats, rising into the air with grace and strength. Below, the ocean receded, the monster statue growing smaller with distance. Above, clouds parted further, revealing a sky the color of hope. Soft gold, quiet blue, and light that did not blind, but welcomed. Andromeda closed her eyes briefly against the wind. Perseus watched her in sidelong glances. Something had shifted between them. Not spoken, not shaped, but real. He had saved her, yes, but she had saved something in him too. She had reminded him that not every life he touched would be weighed by loss. That beauty still existed in the world, not to be feared or conquered, but shared. Hours passed. The coastline of Ethiopia came into view, a stretch of land lined with towers, temples, and gathered crowds. It seemed word of her death, and the beast's coming had drawn the kingdom to its shores. People stood in silence, holding wreaths of mourning, faces lifted to the sea in expectation of sorrow. And then they saw her, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as light, soaring above the waves, wrapped in shadow cloak, her feet borne by a winged savior. A cry went up, then another, and another. By the time Perseus landed at the marble stairs of the palace, the crowd had begun to weep, not out of grief, but disbelief. Cassiopeia, the queen, stumbled forward. Her crown was tilted, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. When she saw her daughter, she fell to her knees. "My child," she whispered. "My child." Andromeda stood still for a moment. Then she knelt beside her mother and, wordlessly, took her hands. There were no accusations, no fury, only reunion. Cepheus, the king, approached more slowly, his robes trailing like regret. He bowed low to Perseus, eyes filled with things no man could name. "You have returned what the gods claimed," he said. "No," Perseus replied softly. "She returned herself. I only gave her a chance." Later, after the sun had fully risen and the palace opened its gates in celebration, Perseus stood alone upon the balcony. He watched the waves and thought of the Gorgon's island, the stone bodies, the breathless hush, the moment the blade fell. Andromeda joined him, barefoot and quiet. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that the gods watch us, not as judges, but as children?" Perseus tilted his head. "How do you mean?" She leaned against the cool marble, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Children break things. Children fight. But they also wonder, and try, and love, even when they don't understand why." He nodded slowly. "I think the gods understand less than we believe. But maybe they admire us because we keep trying anyway." They stood like that for a while, not touching, not speaking, just existing in the calm that follows storms. When the time came for him to leave, Andromeda did not stop him. She placed a hand upon his chest, over the place where his heartbeat lived, and said, "Wherever you go, may your silence be your strength, and may your strength never need to speak." He kissed her hand, and with a breath full of memory, he leapt once more into the open air, the winged sandals lifting him high, carrying him toward the final road, the one that led home. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet hills of Seriphos. The olive trees swayed gently, and the sea lapped lazily against the shore, as if the entire island was in the midst of a slow exhale. Perseus approached, not as the boy who had once run barefoot through tide pools or tossed pebbles into the surf. He returned not as the fisherman's ward, nor as the child of a hidden tower. He returned as someone heavier, not in body, but in presence. The shadow pouch at his side remained sealed, but its weight tugged more on his spirit than his belt. Within it, the head of Medusa lay wrapped in silence. Her story ended, but her voice not forgotten. The sandals of Hermes slowed as his feet touched familiar soil. He landed just beyond the village path, letting the last of the divine wind drift away. The moment he stepped onto the earth, he felt it. Something in the air, subtle and sharp, like the hush before a bell is rung. Seriphos was not as he left it. It felt tense, guarded. He made his way down the dusty path toward Dictys's home, the small cottage nestled between fig trees and wild thyme. As he neared, he saw the familiar figure bent at the edge of the garden, his back broad, hands deep in the earth. "Dictys," Perseus called gently. The man looked up. At first, his face remained blank, as if unable to trust his own eyes. Then came the crack of recognition, wide and wordless, and he rose with arms outstretched. "By the gods," Dictys whispered, "you're alive." Perseus embraced him, feeling the old fisherman's strength, rough and sure. "More or less," he said, a wry smile pulling at his mouth. They stood there in the golden light for a while, the world around them quiet but not empty. The breeze carried the smell of figs and sea salt, and the shadows grew long. When they sat beside the fire that evening, Danae emerged from the doorway. Her hair was streaked now with silver, her steps measured, but her eyes, the same eyes Perseus remembered, from the chest that rocked upon the sea, still held the depth of endless devotion. She said nothing at first, just looked at him. Then she stepped forward and placed her hands on either side of his face, as if confirming that he was not just a dream returning to her. He closed his eyes. Her forehead touched his. "You've seen more than I wished," she whispered. "And returned with more than I hoped," he answered. They sat long into the night, and Perseus told them of his journey, though not all. He spoke of Athena and Hermes, of the Gray Sisters, of the island where stone whispered and time forgot itself. He told them of Andromeda and the sea beast, of flight and silence. But he did not describe Medusa's final breath. That moment was his alone. When dawn broke and the birds stirred softly in the hedges, Dictys leaned forward and asked, "What now?" Perseus's eyes turned toward the palace that crowned the hill. "Now," he said, "I give the king what he asked for." Dictys frowned. "Polydectes never meant for you to return. He wanted to shame you, to send you to your death. You know that." "I do," Perseus said. "But I won't use his treachery to become a monster in turn. I'll return with grace what he demanded in cruelty." He rose, wrapped the pouch tighter, and climbed the hill. The palace gates, once ornamental and open, were now guarded. Spears crossed as he approached. "I've come to see the king," Perseus said calmly. "He holds court." One guard replied, "You're not on the list." Perseus smiled faintly. "Then let him know that Perseus has returned." The guards exchanged a glance. Then one disappeared into the hall. Minutes passed. The sky grew brighter, but no less tense. Then, a shout from within, and the gates parted. Perseus stepped into the grand hall of polished stone and painted ceilings, where Polydectes sat atop a marble throne, flanked by sycophants and courtiers dressed in silks too fine for such a small kingdom. The king's eyes narrowed as he saw the young man approach. Alive, tall, steady. Perseus bowed slightly, neither mocking nor meek. "You asked for the head of Medusa," he said. "I bring it." Gasps echoed through the room. Polydectes laughed, sharp and humorless. "You expect me to believe that?" Without a word, Perseus reached for the pouch. He did not untie it yet. Instead, he looked into the eyes of every man in the room. "Your king sent me to die," he said. "Not for glory, not for honor, but for spite." Whispers broke out. "I have returned," Perseus continued, "not for vengeance, but to reveal truth." Then, before anyone could speak further, he loosened the pouch's mouth and turned only toward Polydectes. The king's face shifted, surprise, then confusion, then horror. The moment his gaze met the eyes of Medusa, even dulled by death, it was over. A crack like splitting stone echoed through the hall. The courtiers fell to silence, and where the king had stood, proud, mocking, invincible, now stood a statue, his features frozen in disbelief, his mouth still curled in cruelty. Perseus closed the pouch again. The hall was silent. Then a voice rose, an elder among the advisers. Long has he ruled through fear. Perhaps it is time Seriphos remembers gentleness. Another voice called, "Let Dictys rule, the one who gave shelter, not chains." Cheers rose, quiet but sincere. Perseus stepped down from the dais, the head still sealed, the weight unchanged. But the burden shifted. Outside, the sea whispered once more. But this time, it did not mourn. In the days that followed the fall of Polydectes, Seriphos changed. Not with trumpet blasts or banners, but with quiet choices. People stepped more softly through the palace gates. Laughter began to return to the market stalls. The fishermen raised their nets not only for food, but for stories again. Even the sea, long used to swallowing secrets, seemed to offer back its calm. At the heart of this change stood Dictys, once a humble fisherman, now a reluctant king. He had not asked for power. But when the people gathered beneath the olive trees and called his name, he did not turn away. He stepped forward, not because he believed himself worthy, but because he believed someone must carry the burden with grace. His first act was to lift the chains of fear that had coiled through the island like seaweed in a storm. His second was to ask Perseus to remain. "I would not wear this crown," Dictys said one evening, standing beneath the stars beside the shore, "if you had not returned. Stay, help shape what comes next." Perseus said nothing for a time. His eyes were on the waves, though his thoughts were far beyond them. "I've lived so long in motion," he murmured. "In flight, in battle. I'm not sure I remember how to be still." Dictys smiled. "Stillness is not the absence of strength, Perseus. It's knowing when not to lift your sword." The word stayed with him, and so he stayed. Days turned to weeks, and the fire in Perseus's chest, once fed by quests and divine whispers, began to quiet. He repaired boats, helped rebuild the village well, taught the younger boys how to fish by hand. They listened in awe, not because he told great tales, but because he didn't. The pouch at his side, the one that held Medusa's head, remained sealed, stored beneath the stone altar of Athena's small shrine. He visited it sometimes, alone, his hands brushing the worn cloth, not to look, never to look, but simply to remember. One late afternoon, as the sky blushed with shades of coral and rose, Danae found him sitting beside the statue of Athena at the temple's edge. She sat beside him, quietly. For a while, they said nothing. The wind moved gently around them, as if it too had learned to whisper. Then she asked, "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "Not what I did, only what had to be done." "She was a monster," Danae offered softly. "No," Perseus said. "She was made into one." Danae's hand found his. "The gods give and the gods take. Sometimes they ask us to carry the part they cannot bear." He looked at her, at the woman who had borne prophecy, exile, motherhood, and shame, all within the walls of a wooden chest. "You've carried it longer than me," he said. She smiled. "And still, I rise." That night, Perseus dreamed. But this dream was not like the others. not of serpents or stone, nor of storms or silence. He stood upon a vast field, golden and endless. Wind brushed the grass in waves. In the center stood a tall mirror, old and framed in ivy, but when he looked into it, he did not see himself. He saw Medusa, not as she had died, but as she had once been. Her hair was long and black, falling in soft coils down her back. Her eyes were full of light. She stood not in a cave, but in a temple bathed in sun. She smiled at something beyond the mirror's frame. Then her eyes turned and found his, not accusing, not mournful, only calm. And in the hush of the dream, she spoke a single word: remember. He woke before dawn, breath shallow. The stars still clung to the edge of the sky, refusing to let go. Perseus rose, dressed in silence, and walked down the sloping path that led to the sea. There, standing at the end of the pier, was a ship. Its sails were furled, its deck unoccupied, but it rocked gently, as though waiting for someone who had not yet spoken his decision aloud. He stepped onto it, ran his fingers along the rail, and knew. He could not remain, not because he was restless, not because he sought glory, but because something within him still listened to the wind, to the stars, to the breath of the world as it turned. By sunrise, the village stirred to find him gone. Only Danae found the letter he had left, tucked between the pages of an old prayer book. It held no tales, no farewells, only these words: I go not to chase fate, but to carry what others cannot. When the world forgets what it once feared, someone must still remember and forgive. P. That morning, as the new King Dictys stood before the people and spoke of harvest and hope, a bird flew overhead, high and sure, its wings dark against the dawn. And though no one could say for certain where Perseus had gone, all agreed on this. He had left not to escape, but to become something quieter than legend, and far more lasting. The sea stretched endlessly before him, soft, gray-blue, rippling like an old thought stirred back into motion. The ship Perseus had taken was small and sturdy, built by Seriphos' hands, and guided now by nothing more than his instincts and the wind's quiet pull. He had no destination, no prophecy beckoning him forward, no voice from the heavens whispering where to turn. Only the weight of a head he would never look upon, and the echo of a name most feared to say. Medusa. He did not speak it aloud, but it traveled with him. In the creak of the wood beneath his boots, in the hush between waves, in the glint of starlight off the shield he still kept strapped to his back. The shield had not dulled. It reflected the world still, all of it. But Perseus no longer used it to search for monsters. He used it now to see truth, especially when the world tried to hide it. He passed villages where stories bloomed faster than wheat. People gathered when they saw the strange young man with dark eyes and winged sandals tied to his belt. Children asked if he could fly. Elders asked if he had truly turned kings to stone. Some whispered, some bowed, some feared. Perseus never corrected them, but neither did he stay. He helped where he could, repaired broken roofs, dug channels for water in parched lands. He ferried a sick boy to a healer over a chasm others feared to cross. He pulled a fisherman from a capsized boat and said nothing of who he was, only asked if the man's hands could still hold a net. People called him many things: hero, wanderer, ghost, but to himself, he was none of those. He was simply a man who had walked into the dark and walked back out, changed. One evening, he came to a forest village wrapped in fog. The trees were tall and ancient, their trunks carved with symbols older than the Olympians. The people here were quiet, watchful, They lived by the rhythm of the earth, planting by moonlight, singing to their crops, listening to the wind, before deciding when to hunt. Perseus stayed one night, then two, then a week. There was a girl, maybe 16, no more, who watched him each morning as he mended the broken railing on their village's footbridge. Her name was Eleni. Her eyes were pale, her limbs thin, her hair braided like rope. On the fourth morning, she asked, "Are you afraid of the dark?" Perseus didn't look up from his work. Not anymore. She sat beside him. "Why not?" He thought for a moment. "Because I've seen what hides there, and I've seen what lives in the light. Both can wound, but only one teaches you how to listen." She was quiet a long while, then asked, "Have you ever been cursed?" Perseus looked at her then. Her face was too still for a child, her voice too careful. "Are you?" he asked gently. She nodded. "They say I was born under a bad moon, that I bring death when I cry, that I dream of things that later come true. Do you believe that?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Sometimes I cry, and something dies. Sometimes I don't, and it dies anyway." Perseus pulled something from the pouch at his side. Not the head, but a small pendant he'd carved from driftwood. It was shaped like a spiral, the symbol of wind, of change, of patience. He pressed it into her hand. "Your gift frightens people. That doesn't make it evil." She clutched it. "Will it protect me?" He shook his head. "Nothing protects us completely, but understanding makes us strong. Strong enough to choose kindness, even when we're afraid." She blinked, and for the first time smiled. That night, the villagers offered him bread and sweet wine beneath the trees. They didn't ask who he was, though some surely knew. They only thanked him. When dawn came, he left again, not for glory, not to flee, but because the wind whispered, "Not yet finished." He didn't know where he was going, only that the journey had changed. He was no longer Perseus the slayer, the warrior, the hero. He was Perseus the rememberer, and that was enough. It was nearly winter when Perseus reached the valley. No roads led to it. No signs marked its boundary. Only the quiet, growing deeper with each step, told him he had entered a place the world had chosen to forget. The valley floor was wide and flat, carpeted with fine dust and scattered bones of trees long since withered. The wind here was not cruel, but purposeful, brushing gently across the skin like a finger to the lips. "Hush," it seemed to say. "Here, even silence remembers." Perseus walked until he found the stones. Not fallen rock, not natural ridges. These were shaped, worn not by rain, but by story. Dozens of them, standing in a gentle arc, each one bearing faint, eroded carvings. Not words, not quite. Symbols, perhaps, or memories left behind by hands too old to name. In the center of the circle stood one taller than the rest, smooth, unmarked, glowing faintly in the dim winter sun. Perseus sat before it. He did not speak. He did not move. And yet, he felt listened to. The pouch at his side stirred slightly, as if the presence within could sense where they had arrived. He placed a hand over it, not to quiet it, but to assure it, "We are here." This was the place. He did not know how he knew, but he did. He had dreamed of it once, years ago, before he had ever lifted a sword, before he had worn sandals made by gods. A dream of a field full of standing stones that murmured without mouths. A circle where grief was not swallowed, but welcomed. He opened the pouch slowly. Inside, Medusa's head lay wrapped in soft black cloth. No breath escaped it now. No flicker of movement stirred the coils of once living hair. But the presence remained, gentle now, mournful even. A power quieted, not erased. Perseus unwrapped just enough to reveal her face. He did not look directly. He turned the shield again, the one gifted by Athena, and angled it toward her. In its reflection, he saw the face that had once turned armies to stone. It was still. No malice, no sorrow, only rest. He placed the head gently on the earth beside the tall stone, and for the first time in his life, he spoke to her. "I don't know what the gods meant when they made you this way," he said softly. "I don't know if they were punishing you, or protecting you, or afraid of you." He paused. "But I know this. You were not born to be feared. You were made to be feared, and you deserved better." The wind stirred the cloth slightly. Perseus bowed his head. "I carried your name across the sky," he said. "I used your curse to save lives, but not once did I forget you were more than a weapon." He looked to the stone, tall, silent, ancient, and whispered, "May this place be your temple, not to worship power, but to remember pain." The air shifted, just slightly, enough for him to feel a hush fall even deeper across the valley. He rewrapped the head and placed it within a hollow in the earth. The stones did not speak, not in words, but something around him exhaled, as if the ground itself had waited long for this moment. He covered the hollow with soft earth and layered smooth river stones on top. Not a grave, not quite. More like an offering, a return. When he finished, he sat back once more, and the wind moved through the stone circle like a lullaby without melody. He dreamed that night beneath the stars, not of monsters, not of battles, but of a woman walking through a field of flowers, barefoot, laughing. Her hair was long and black. Her eyes no longer turned to stone. She turned to him once, smiled, and said nothing, and it was enough. By dawn, Perseus rose. He left the valley as it had been, untouched, unnamed, but not forgotten, never forgotten. Snow fell gently in the mountain village of Thalos, a place tucked high above the tree line, where roofs were steep and chimneys always breathed. The wind here was honest and cold, and the stars seemed to hang lower in the sky, close enough to whisper to those willing to listen. Perseus had arrived just before the first frost. He had followed no road. The ship had long been left behind, gifted to a family of pearl divers near Crete. The sandals of Hermes remained folded in his pack, no longer needed, or perhaps no longer deserved. He walked now as any man did, by foot, by feel, by faith. The villagers of Thalos had no temples, no shrines. Their gods were wind and wood and firelight. They spoke in short phrases, worked with steady hands, and measured time by the weight of snow on their rooftops. When they saw the stranger with the dark cloak and quiet eyes arrive on foot, they did not ask who he was. They only offered him warmth and bread. He accepted both with quiet thanks. And when an elder fell sick with fever, it was Perseus who stayed awake to tend the pot of herbs. When a snowstorm collapsed the roof of the granary, it was Perseus who dug with bare hands until the grain was recovered. When wolves circled the sheep pen at night, it was Perseus who stood watch, not with sword or shield, but with torch and presence. He was not their hero. He was their neighbor. He lived in a stone hut near the edge of the village, one they had helped him build in the space of a single afternoon. No one asked what he had run from, but they knew, in the silent way that mountain people always know, that his quiet came from somewhere deep. Sometimes he sat for hours outside his door, staring into the forest. Children would pass and wave. Some brought him carved figurines, or bits of honeycomb, or wildflowers pressed between pages. He never told them stories. But when they asked, "Have you seen a real monster?" he would answer, "Yes." And when they asked, "Did you kill it?" he would say, "No. I only gave it peace." They never asked more after that. One evening, deep into the first winter, as snow fell thick and soft like ash, the villagers gathered for their seasonal fire, an old tradition where they burned dry pine and sang low songs to mark the turning of the dark months. The fire was built high in the center of the village square. Around it, the people wrapped in wool cloaks and shared broth from clay pots. Children danced, old men hummed, women clapped their hands softly to the rhythm of memory. Perseus stood at the edge of the fire's glow, hands clasped behind his back, eyes reflecting the flame. The elder, a woman named Mydra, face like worn bark and voice like flint, approached him slowly. "You've been with us a while," she said. He nodded. "Longer than I meant to." She studied him. "You carry something. Still." Perseus didn't answer. She pointed a knotted finger toward the fire. "Do you know what we burn each year?" "Wood," he said softly. She smiled without humor. "And regrets. And names we don't speak anymore. And memories that no longer feed us." She handed him a small stick, carved with a spiral. "For you," she said, "if there's something you wish to set down." Perseus looked at it a long time. Then slowly, he stepped forward and knelt beside the fire. He whispered something into the flames, words no one heard, not even Medra, and he placed the spiral into the blaze. The flames curled around it. It did not scream. It did not vanish. It simply joined the warmth. As he stood again, someone began to sing. A low voice, rough but true. Another joined, then another. It was not a hymn, not a prayer, just a melody that knew how to wait. And beneath that sky, where stars hovered near and snow softened the edge of every shadow, Perseus felt something shift inside him. Not disappear, not resolve, just settle. Like the last ember in a dying fire, not yet gone, still glowing. Winter lingered in Thalos like a guest too polite to leave. Days were dim and wrapped in frost. And even the river sang more slowly beneath its growing crust of ice. Yet life moved on, quiet and certain. Perseus split wood, repaired fences, helped gather herbs from the base of the frozen cliffs. His hands grew rough again. His sleep deepened. His breath no longer rose in panic, and he smiled more. Sometimes only a little, the corner of his mouth tugging upward when a child shared a poorly carved bird, or when the goats escaped the pen for the third time in a week. But the smile was there, honest, earned. The villagers no longer called him stranger. The children no longer asked for stories. They brought him stones shaped like faces, twigs that looked like swords, or feathers they thought might belong to the gods. He never corrected them. He only listened. But one morning, the wind brought something else. It came while he was mending the roof of Medra's hut. He paused at the sound, a soft whir, like fabric catching on thorns. Then a shadow passed overhead, small and flickering, a falcon. Its wings beat steadily against the pale sky, and clutched in its talon was a narrow scroll wrapped in green twine. Perseus climbed down, holding his breath as the bird descended and landed on a fence post. Its feathers were streaked with white, its eyes sharp and knowing. He held out his arm, and the falcon stepped onto it without fear. Carefully, Perseus removed the scroll. The parchment was stiff from cold, but the writing was fresh, clear, flowing, and unmistakably familiar. It was Andromeda's hand. "Perseus, the world moves again. A storm from the north has struck the coast near Ethiopia, villages flooded, temples ruined. And the old priests, the ones who once demanded my sacrifice, now ask for you. They say the gods are angry, that your return would calm the waters. But I do not call you in fear. I call you because I remember your quiet. If you still carry the wind with you, let it blow this way again. A. Perseus read it twice. Then he let the paper fall against his chest, holding it there for a moment, eyes closed. He had not thought of her in many months. Not because she had faded, but because her memory was warm, like a hearth in a distant room. Not needed, but always welcome. The villagers saw him standing there with the falcon perched on his arm, and knew. Maedra approached him that evening, her old coat trailing behind her like a cloak of bark. "You'll go?" she said, not as question, but as statement. Perseus nodded. "They'll want you to raise a sword again." "I won't." "And if they ask you to kill?" "I'll answer with mercy." She nodded, satisfied. "You'll need a better coat," she added, and handed him a bundle of fur. That night, as he packed, a few villagers gathered by his door. Eleni, the girl with the dream-haunted eyes, stood with a polished stone in her hand. "For your pocket," she said, "so you don't forget the way back." Perseus smiled. "I never forget a place where I've been loved." By dawn, he was gone, not on a ship, not with fanfare. Just a man walking down a snow-lined path toward a place that had once tried to kill what he had saved. The falcon flew ahead, a flicker of wings in the morning light, and though his steps left prints behind him, the wind quickly softened them. Because some journeys, the ones that matter, are not remembered in footprints. They are remembered in echoes. The coastline of Ethiopia had changed. Where once warm sands met calm tides, now stood stone levees and seawalls, hastily built, lined with offerings. Flowers wilted under salt spray. Candles sputtered in the wind. Statues of Poseidon stood cracked and leaning, their faces washed blank by storms. Perseus arrived not on wing or wave, but on foot, cloaked in fur and silence. He came without guard or announcement, a lone figure striding down the long path toward the capital gates. The guards, recognizing his bearing, if not his face, parted without question. Whispers bloomed behind him like footprints. "It's him! The Slayer! The Windwalker!" He didn't pause. He walked the city streets where once people had cheered a sacrifice, Andromeda, chained to a rock, waiting for death she never chose. Now those same people watched from windows and doorways, some ashamed, others curious. A few bowed their heads. Most remained still. When he reached the palace, the doors opened before him, and she was waiting. Andromeda stood beneath the high archway in robes the color of storm-washed stone. Her hair was longer now, braided with silver thread, but her eyes, steady, fierce, and clear, were unchanged. "You came," she said simply. "You asked," he replied. A quiet breath passed between them. Not a sigh, but a release. They walked together through the palace halls, past murals of long-dead kings and gods carved in triumph. She led him not to a throne room, but to a library, high-ceilinged, lined with scrolls and records untouched by many hands. "They say the gods are angry," she began, her voice calm. "Floods have swallowed villages. The earth shakes. The temple priests say Poseidon demands sacrifice again." "And they want me," Perseus said. "They want what they can't name," Andromeda corrected. "A symbol, a shield, something to offer that will make them feel in control." Perseus sat beside the tall window where light spilled across a map of the kingdom. "Do you believe them?" She shook her head. I believe the earth shifts. I believe storms rise. But not every silence is a god's punishment. Sometimes the world breathes, and it is not for us to explain why. He looked at her then, not as the woman he had saved, but as the ruler she had become. You could refuse them. I have, she said, and I will again, but it would help if you stood beside me. Perseus didn't answer at once. He stared out the window, toward the sea. The last time I was here, he murmured, I used a monster's head to turn a beast to stone. They called me a hero. You were, she said softly. No, he replied. I was a man carrying a curse given to a woman who never asked for it. Andromeda stepped closer. Then what are you now? He thought for a long time. Maybe a mirror, he said. Something people look into and see what they fear, or what they regret. She reached out and took his hand. Then let them see that regret can become grace. That evening, as the sky turned to flame above the horizon, a gathering was held in the palace square. Nobles, villagers, scholars, and priests filled the stone courtyard. Torches flickered along the walls. The air buzzed with tension. Andromeda stood at the steps, regal and quiet. Perseus stood beside her. A priest stepped forward, his robes weighted with gold. You come before us, Perseus, bearer of God-given judgment, he said, voice echoing. Will you speak for the gods? Will you show us what we must offer to quiet their wrath? Perseus looked out at the crowd. He saw faces young and old, fear and expectation, hope tangled with superstition. He stepped forward slowly. I have seen monsters, he said, voice firm. I have faced gods. I have watched the sea rise and cities fall. And I tell you now, no offering, no blood, no statue or sacrifice will ever stop the earth from breathing. The crowd murmured. He continued, You do not need a symbol to cast into the sea. You need courage to stand when the storm comes. You need compassion to rebuild. You need wisdom to stop calling pain a punishment. And the gods? A priest called. What do they ask? Perseus looked skyward. They ask nothing, he said. We are the ones who ask, and we must learn when to listen to silence. Then slowly, he reached into his cloak and drew forth a bundle wrapped in black cloth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He held it gently, with both hands, but did not open it. This is what you sought, he said. The head of Medusa, the curse you thought would protect or punish. He turned toward the edge of the square, where a fire burned, and he walked, each step deliberate. When he reached the flame, he knelt and placed the bundle into the fire. It did not scream. It did not burn. It simply vanished, smoke curling upward, caught by the stars. He stood again. This curse is not yours to bear, he said. It is done. The crowd was silent. Then someone began to weep. Not loudly, just a single, soft sound. And as it spread, something broke. Not in sorrow, but in release. The fire burned low, long after the crowd had dispersed. The black cloth had vanished into the coals without a trace, leaving no ash, no scent, no residue, only warmth. It was as if the burden had chosen to dissolve rather than cling, as if Medusa's final echo had returned to the wind, light as breath. Perseus remained by the flame. He did not speak. He did not weep. He simply stayed, watching the embers glow, watching them dim, until only the faintest red pulses remained, like the last beats of an old heart. Nearby, Andromeda sat on the steps of the palace, her cloak wrapped around her like a memory. No one disturbed them. The city had stilled. No horns, no drums, only the occasional sound of wind brushing through fig trees and waves kissing the distant shoreline. Eventually, she rose and walked to his side. "You could have kept it," she said. "I did," he replied, "but not in a way the world understood." He stood slowly, stretching limbs that had gone stiff with stillness. "Now she's where she should be, not as a weapon, but as a story, no longer whispered with fear." Andromeda nodded. "You gave them something they didn't know they needed. They'll forget again," he said. "Yes, but not all of them, not completely." He looked at her. Time had not dulled the sharpness of her spirit, nor softened her gaze. She had become the kind of queen legends forgot to mention, not made of fire, but of stone warmed by sunlight. Steady, grounded, enduring. He smiled. "I think I've stayed long enough." Her smile was sad, but not surprised. "Where will you go?" "Where the wind forgets my name," he said. They stood in silence, not touching, not needing to. And then she reached into her cloak and pulled out a small vial, stoppered with silver. "For the road," she said. "River water from the spring near the rock where I was chained. It's clear now. Clean. It reminds me that wounds can become wells." He accepted it with reverence, tucking it beside his belt. "Thank you. You saved me once," she said. "Then again and again, without ever trying to keep me." He hesitated. "Would you have stayed if I had asked?" "Yes," he answered, "but only part of me." She nodded. "Then you've chosen well." When he left, it was before dawn. No procession followed him. No farewell was shouted from balconies. He carried no weapons, no satchel of divine tools. Only a walking staff carved from a fig branch, and the small vial of water at his side. He passed fields, rivers, mountain paths. He passed temples where no prayers were spoken anymore, and stones worn smooth by the weight of old hopes. He passed people, some who recognized him, most who did not. And he helped them, as he always had. A lost sheep, a broken roof, a child too afraid of the dark to sleep. He never lingered long, but each time he left, the village seemed a little quieter, a little warmer, as if the fire he carried had passed to them, unseen but enduring. Years passed. Legends grew, shrank, twisted. Some said Perseus became a constellation, placed in the stars by Athena herself. Others claimed he lived among shepherds in the northern valleys, tending goats and telling no one his name. A few swore they met him in a ruined town, long after they believed him dead. Older, softer, but still with that same gaze that held the silence of mountains. But no one truly knew, not for certain. Until, many winters later, a group of travelers stumbled upon a small hut deep in a forest where even maps hesitated. It was empty. The fire had long gone cold. But inside, they found a single carved chair, a worn staff, and a polished mirror shield hanging on the wall, clean, untouched by dust. And beneath it, written in a hand careful and calm, were words etched into the wood. "I was not the fire. I was only the ember that stayed a little longer, so others might find their way." They did not understand it fully, but they took nothing, only sat by the cold hearth for a while, and when they left, they lit a small flame, not out of ritual, but respect, and whispered thanks into the trees. Some stories do not end in thunder or glory. Some stories end quietly, like a hand let go, or a breath drawn in still air, or a fire that goes out only after giving all its warmth away. And so, dear listener, the story of Perseus and Medusa gently comes to a close, not with the clash of swords or the roar of triumph, but with a hush, a breath, a flickering ember that lingers in the heart long after the fire fades. Tonight, you didn't just follow a hero who flew through the skies or faced gods and monsters. You followed a soul who carried the weight of choices, the sorrow of those forgotten, and the strength to choose kindness even in a world that begged for violence. Perseus became more than myth. He became memory, compassion, and quiet courage. Medusa, too, was no longer just a monster in the shadows. She was a name, a voice, a presence that deserved peace. In the end, this story wasn't about slaying the feared. It was about understanding it, setting it down, and walking forward with gentler hands. If this tale brought you warmth, comfort, or just a moment of calm, I hope you carry that feeling into your dreams tonight. Thank you, truly, for spending this time here with me, for pausing your day, your thoughts, your busy mind, to listen. It means more than you know. If you enjoyed this story and would like more gentle journeys just like it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every kind click helps this space grow and reach more hearts in need of rest. Now, it's time to let your thoughts soften, to let your breath slow, to let your heart ease. You are safe, you are warm, and you are exactly where you need to be. Good night, dear friend. Sleep deeply, dream kindly, and may tomorrow greet you with peace.